Hi everybody! Welcome to week 1 of CAT125R, Public Rhetoric and Practical Communication, which is a course that focuses on digital rhetoric. This week we'll be talking about your rhetorical position and ways to facilitate meaningful feedback. Greetings from Lüneburg, Germany! I'm here at the Digital School of Leuphana University, and I look forward to hearing about the interesting places in the world that you'll be taking CAT 125R from as well. I know that some of you are planning to log into the course from studying abroad or from some interesting travel experiences, so make sure to share those experiences with your peers and with me. This is an interesting course in that we'll be exploring questions about online identity, collaboration, and rhetorical expression by using an online environment. So we'll talk about ways that we can foster a good community here as we get to know each other through remote collaboration. The first thing to do is work out your access to technology, because things are going to move pretty fast in this 5-week course, so you want to make sure not to miss any class sessions or assignments. So the first thing to do is figure out how to use Canvas, which is our learning management system, effectively. I'll be sending out an email that will give you information about how to do that. You'll also be using Adobe Connect. Your section leader will be sending you instructions, but I'll also be sending you a list of ways to connect effectively in a timely manner so that you can participate in your sections. We have online discussion, which happens synchronously. That means at the same time. But we also have a kind of discussion that takes place through text on our forum, which is called Piazza. And that's asynchronous. In other words, you might be posting to Piazza at 3 p.m. and somebody else in the course might be posting to Piazza at 6 a.m. But you're both participating with your text messages. So it's important to participate both talking in Adobe Connect, but also writing in Piazza. You'll also be responding to the videos, they're interactive videos, using a technology called Zaption. And it's really important to stay up on your responses to the lectures. Most of the responses ask for a reflection and pose some open-ended questions that ask you to do some critical thinking about how you can apply ideas in the course to your own rhetorical expressions. And then finally, you'll be using a technology called Storify. That's a way to curate material both from social media and from research resources on the web. The first thing to do in a course about rhetoric is get yourself accustomed to the discourse. And that can be challenging because rhetoric gets sort of a bad rap in our society. We tend to talk about things being only rhetoric or mere rhetoric or just rhetoric. So what we tend to say when we talk about rhetoric is that we're saying that something is either deceptive or empty and lacking in real significance. We're going to actually argue that rhetoric is central to the ways that you should think about your communicative activities. But we're going to give you a little specialized discourse in order to do that. So the first term that we're going to talk about is the rhetor. The rhetor is a doer of a rhetorical act. So the rhetor of a speech might be the President of the United States. You might be a rhetor when you are presenting, say, a poster presentation at an undergraduate research forum. There might be certain kinds of rhetors who communicate via YouTube. And you might see their YouTube channels where they're addressing the audience very directly. But a rhetor can also be someone who is using other channels of communication beside the oral channel. That can include nonverbal communication, can be important for a rhetor, so body language might be important. Written communication, so the ways that you write your papers in your college courses might be part of how you assume your identity as a rhetor. And the rhetor can also be someone who is involved in different kinds of visual and digital design work that we'll be talking about later in the course. So you'll be rhetors in this course. You'll be thinking about ways to create effective messages for oral communication, for traditional print communication, and also for online digital communication. At the same time, as Professor Jonathan Alexander models, you'll be a rhetorician. In other words, you'll be someone who is an analyzer or interpreter of a rhetorical act. And that might mean that you'll be exposed to people who are teachers, like Professor Jonathan Alexander in Unit 1, who is a professor of rhetoric. But it also might mean that you could be a co-learner of rhetoric. So in this course, not only is your professor, me, and your section leader a rhetorician, but you yourself are going to be taking on that rhetorician's role as a peer instructor in this course. So you'll be doing some interesting forms of rhetorical analysis in that role as a rhetorician. And Professor Alexander tries to encourage you with that activity by asking you to compare two websites. So you'll be looking at Erica Hayazaki's website, and you'll also be looking at David Lum's website. And Professor Alexander will encourage you to compare and contrast the rhetorical styles of those two websites, the ways that they address an audience, the way that they perform certain acts of self-presentation rhetorically, and the ways that they negotiate between visual and verbal design. Now this is tricky because you're going to be both rhetor and rhetorician in this class. In other words, you're going to be creating rhetorical expressions and also analyzing them. And that means that you're in sort of an interesting rhetorical position. And we ask you to explore that position critically in the very first selfie assignment, where you're both creating different forms of visual media for public presentation for the 4 different audiences that you're thinking about. So that's the Facebook profile, the corporate website, for example, the website that you would use if you were an employee at a bank, the dating website, and then finally the history website about the history book about what life would be like in the 21st century. So I'm going to be modeling ways that we can think about the selfie assignment as a way to experiment with different identities, because that's going to be very important for the work of this course. One of the things that in Unit 1, Professor Tom Belsdorf suggests is that we should be open to the idea that multiple identities still might have the status of reality. So he asks, what if all of these identities are real? The different kinds of identities that we create online and the different kinds of identities that we create offline. What if we accept the authenticity of those identities in their rhetorical function, and then take those identities seriously and try to use them to do certain kinds of rhetorical work, to affect certain kinds of purposes. So in this course, we'll be talking a bit about rhetorical theory. And that goes beyond just thinking about the means of persuasion. In other words, we'll be talking a lot about how you persuade another party by using ethos or credibility, pathos or your ability to affect the audience emotionally, and logos, your ability to argue effectively in a well-structured and logical argument. So the means of persuasion are certainly important in this class, but it's not the only game in town. Because we're going to be thinking not just about the means of persuasion, but also ways that we can think critically about audiences and purposes, and how audiences and purposes might also shape rhetorical expression. Furthermore, because this is a course about life in the 21st century, we're going to be thinking a lot about media, mediation, and remediation. We'll be thinking about the ways that computational media shape our rhetorical expressions and how different kinds of media call upon us for different kinds of rhetorical competencies. We'll also be talking a lot about constraints and dependencies and codes and the ways that you're not entirely free to express yourself through just your own intentions. In other words, the ways that our communications with the world are in turn shaped by the world. So this is a very important part of rhetorical theory, is understanding that there are certain power relations that we need to respond to, and that there's certain limitations just created by prior history, and also by particular kinds of design decisions that are made by those who create the channels for our communication. We'll also be thinking about something that's very important in the 21st century, which is network effects. So now we have technologies that allow social networks to be more visible and mappable, but that has certain consequences in that we need to be mindful of the ways that a message that I put into a digital file and send to you might reach unintended audiences and be used for unintended purposes. And there might be particular kinds of multipliers that are affected by these network structures. So the readings for the course for this first unit will be available in the social media reader. And that's available free and online because we are big proponents of using open source resources because open access is a very important principle in this course. So in defining rhetoric, it's sometimes useful to look at some experts in rhetorical study. So the first person I might point you to is Andrea Lunsford. And she says rhetoric is the art, practice, and study of human communication. So in this course, we're going to be both thinking about the art of that communication. We're going to be doing a lot of practice of that communication. And we're going to study it, thinking about how communication has changed in the digital era and what particular aspects of communication have remained the same. Another nice definition of rhetoric is this one from Lloyd Bitzer, who says, rhetoric is a mode of altering reality, not by the direct application of energy to objects, but by the creation of discourse which changes reality through the mediation of thought and action. So one of the ways that you might want to change reality is creating particular kinds of visual artifacts. And one of the artifacts that we'll be talking about is the selfie. Now, strictly speaking, most of the selfies that you'll be posting in your critical selfie assignment aren't actually selfies. They're self-representations, but you might not be literally taking them yourself with a mobile device. And also, selfies tend to assume that the audience for the selfie is going to be somebody who's on a social media platform. However, this critical selfie assignment can help you think about the rhetorical triangle a bit. So the rhetorical triangle, some of you might have encountered before in your coursework, asks those who are analyzing rhetoric to separate out the different components. So you're thinking about the product of the rhetorical act, which could be a speech, it could be a text, it could be some kind of designed product. You're thinking about the speaker, designer, or rhetor, the composer of the artifact, text, or experience. And you're also thinking about the audience. Sometimes we like to say a community of use. So who's going to be the recipient of this message? So, and one of the things that we're trying to kind of get you to be conscious about is the fact that this communication that's mediated through a particular speech or product or composition, that channel of communication between the sender and receiver of a message is often a two-way street. So that even though it might be shaped by the intent of the speaker and the expectations of the audience, that those that shaping is going to move in both directions. So you want to be thinking about your audience as you think about your rhetorical design. So in the critical selfie assignment, the text or composition or product that you're creating is the critical selfie itself. So that's going to be 4 images and then your reflections and commentary on those images. The person creating the critical selfie is you, the rhetor in CAT125. And the audience for that critical selfie assignment is going to be multiple. You're going to be communicating with your peers, with your TAs, with me as your professor, because I always read everything that gets posted in Piazza. But you'll also be thinking about yourself as an audience, right? What does it mean to create compositions that then you yourself analyze? The context in which you'll be producing this critical selfie is going to be Piazza. Because one thing is we often like to do is think just beyond the rhetorical triangle to the larger context in which a given rhetorical triangle is operating. So in this case, you'll be working with the constraints and affordances of Piazza as a software platform. And you'll also be thinking about the purpose of this assignment, which is to create dialogue, to build community with your fellow students, and also to model good feedback, because feedback is the purpose of Unit 2. So a lot of you have encountered feedback mechanisms in various interactions with social media. So you probably are familiar with the like button on Facebook. You also know about its comments feature. You might see particular postings be voted up or voted down on Reddit. You might see how particular kinds of tweets can be favorited or retweeted. There are other kinds of feedback that you can give when you review, say, something on TripAdvisor or a movie website. You can rate your drivers on Uber. You can rate your hosts on Airbnb. So there are all of these mechanisms for providing feedback online. We want you to get familiar with Piazza as a forum for creating feedback among your peers. So be a careful reader of your fellow students' critical selfies assignments and really help them think about their own rhetorical position in ways that will be constructive for their development in this very short time in the course. One of the things we'll be talking a lot about is facilitative feedback. So that's feedback that encourages more composition and revision. Feedback that helps rhetors do. Because feedback that is merely corrective, so marking errors, or evaluative, just saying if something is good or bad, doesn't necessarily help in creating more rhetorical expressions that are effective in the future. So one way to think about effective feedback is to look closely at the video lectures from Professor Mimi Ito of UC Irvine, who is well known for her research about affinity groups and communities of practice. So she's someone who has studied ways that online communities form together in interest-driven groups, and then how those groups then serve as communities of practice that help people learn to do new things. So, you'll find groups of people who are learning to write computer code online, or people who are learning to knit online, or people who are learning to write fan fiction online, or people who are learning to make remix videos online. So Ito studies these communities of practice, looks at their social behavior, and particularly thinks about the ways that feedback mechanisms are very important to how they operate. So in thinking about not only creating a good environment for feedback, but also ways that you can create rhetorical expressions that are going to be useful in your real-world experience, we've designed the first set of units around the personal statement assignment. The personal statement assignment asks you to write a personal statement of 5,300 to 5,500 characters aimed at a particular audience, such as graduate school, professional school, or a scholarship organization. You need to keep your statement general enough so it could be reused for more than one of the same type of audience. Your personal statement should have a clearly articulated and lively introduction and conclusion, a linear structure that connects your paragraphs together in a logical order, a coherent focus that develops a particular theme, and concrete details to support the portrait of yourself that you're describing. In general, you should show the reader rather than tell the reader by analyzing specific examples and salient evidence. So I'll be showing some examples of personal statements in Unit 3, but here in Unit 2, I want you to be aware of the importance of having writing that really speaks to those means of persuasion. Writing that establishes your ethos, your credibility and authority, that takes advantage of logos, right, so that has coherence and a logical order, and makes an argument that's supported with specific details about your competence for a given position, and also something that has this liveliness, this appeal to a potential audience that is also an important component of the means of persuasion. So these preliminary assignments that come after the critical selfie assignment, the assignments about what you learned inside of college and what you learned outside of college, those assignments are intended to help build up to the personal statement assignment. At the same time, you'll be working on facilitating meaningful feedback so you can start becoming a more effective peer reviewer of the other students in this class. So I hope you have a great first week in summer session 1. I hope you'll visit me during my office hours. What you're going to do is actually go to Adobe Connect, and then here's the address. I'm here Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon, and they're just like my office hours in my real office. Even though I might be somewhere like this, Lüneburg, Germany, I'm still going to meet with you with the same sort of focused, helpful, supportive attitude that I would bring if you visit me in my office. And I hope you'll come visit me in my office as well when I'm back on the UCSD campus. So bye for now. See you soon.